this moment because there is somebody coming in. Yes. Yes. And I know somebody's going to introduce him, so let's give him a bigger round of applause. Come on. Statesboro, let Senator Warnock feel welcome. Yes.
I'll introduce you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce the person who's been leading our beautiful city of Statesboro, Mayor Jonathan McCullough.
All right, Statesboro. That's a beautiful sight to see right there. We got Senator, and let me repeat that, Senator Raphael Warnock in the building, in the borough. Let's give it up. Now, I don't want to belabor this long because we come to hear the man of the hour. But I want to give you guys this. The next time you go into the polls, you got to ask yourself this. When I cast my ballot, am I voting for someone who was fighting for me before they got in the office? The answer to that for Senator Warnock is not just yes, but hell yes. He walked the streets with us. He fought for us. He stood beside us. And when he got in the office, he didn't just talk the talk, he walked the walk. That's the kind of senator that we have in Senator Raphael Warnock. So my message to Herschel Walker is, Herschel, if you didn't give a damn about us when you was in Texas, then how you gonna give a damn about us in Georgia? Herschel, there's a difference between running a football and running government, Herschel. Herschel, you wasn't with us when we was fighting for social justice and fighting for Medicare. Herschel, you were not there. And so when it comes November the 8th, when my ballot box go in, you won't be there. We have a senator that understands you empower the people to build economies. And one thing that we want to give a shout out for Senator Warnock is that he and his colleagues had the courage to stand up against a tyrant that was trying to overturn an election for the U.S. people. I can only imagine if Herschel was there. I can only shudder to think of the idea of Herschel Walker being our senator for the next 6 years. Oh, hell no. This is the time that we must stand up. We must fight. It is our turn to have the back of the man who's had our back for year after year, decade after decade, walking in the steps of civil rights leaders like John Lewis, like Dr. King, and now we will fight for him. See, we got a senator that had the insight to understand the importance of empowering local communities. And what you guys may not know is that that very same neighborhood revitalization program we got here is because of him. That $2 million food bank facility that we building is because of him. And because of that, Senator Warnock, we will stand with you.
Hello, Statesboro, Georgia! Wow! Bullitt County. I see Scriven County over here. It's great to be back in coastal Georgia. This is my neck of the woods. And y'all are my kind of people. Let's get this thing done. Let's win this race so we can all sit down somewhere and have a low country boil. Well, I got a lot of friends here. I want to thank the mayor, Mayor Jonathan McCullough, for his kind introduction. Give him a great big round of applause. So grateful to Councilwoman Paulette Shavers. Give her a great big round of applause. We got a candidate for Congress District 12, Liz Johnson. Good to see you. Lynn Fatica, where are you? County Commissioner Anthony Simmons. Councilman Venus Mack. Candidate for House District 158, Madeline Ryan Smith. And a good friend and brother of mine, and a lawyer and a preacher, the Reverend Francis Johnson. Let's hear it. Good to see you. Wow, it's a beautiful day in Georgia. And it's going to be even more beautiful on November 8th when we win this thing one more time. So tell all of your friends, tell your family members, tell the folk at church, tell the folks at work, tell everybody you know that it all comes down to this. There is no need to wait until November 8th. Now, November 8th is Election Day, but we no longer talk about Election Day. The issues are too urgent. The stakes are too high. And the differences between me and my opponent are too wide and vast and deep to leave all of that up to one day. It's election season and the time to vote is right now. Raise your hand if you've already voted. Keep your hand up if you're going to get at least 3 more to vote. Come on, let's get this thing done. Are y'all ready to get this thing done? Say November 8th. Might be too late. Vote now. Now, you ought to spend election day just getting the last few, the stragglers in. You know, anything can happen on one day. You could have a family issue, or emergency, something that calls your way. Life happens. You never know. It might rain. Now, to be sure, rain is no reason not to vote. Not at all. But long before I was a senator, I've served over the last 17 years and now as a pastor. And I happen to know, as someone who's been sitting in the pulpit on Sunday morning, when it rains, When it rains, you know, something happens to the faithful. The Baptists say, I've already been baptized. The Methodists say, I've already been sprinkled. And the pastor's sitting there wondering, where is everybody? So don't wait until November 8th. Say November 8th. Might be too late. Vote now. Tell everybody in your house to vote. If you live in my house and you're registered to vote, you're 18 of age, you ought to vote. Make sure our young people vote. They, in some ways, have the most at stake. We're talking about the existential crisis of climate change. Whole range of issues. They have so much at stake. If you're married, tell your spouse that it's going to be a few long, cold nights if you haven't voted. If somebody, you know, is interested in you and they want to date you, tell them to write their phone number down on the back of a voter registration card, because we don't even date people who don't vote. I'm laughing, but I'm not joking. Are you ready to get this thing done? I want to thank you, Statesboro, and all the folks in this region for giving me the high honor of my life. You know, it's a really special thing for the people of your state, for your neighbors, to say, we want you to represent us in high office. For your neighbors, for the people of your state, to say that when we think about our families, when we take stock of our hopes and our dreams for our children, when we think about our mothers and our fathers and our grandmothers and grandfathers, and our hopes and dreams for them as they enter the evening of their lifetime, we want you to represent us. We want you to stand up for us. We want you to fight for us. That, for me, is a sacred trust. It's something like being a pastor. It's something that I take very seriously. And I take your hopes and your dreams and your concerns and the promises that all of us make to our children, I carry that with me in my heart. And I take it with me to Washington, D.C. And it might sound so corny that some folk in this cynical political environment have trouble believing it, but it's true. Even with all of the noise and the craziness that goes on in Washington, D.C., even with all of the attacks that they try on me and my church, even as they bear false witness against the spiritual home of Martin Luther King Jr., and try to speak ill of the outreach ministry that we provide for the most marginalized members of the human family every single week, because we believe in the gospel. Because we are Matthew 25 Christians. That's who we are, where Jesus said, I was hungry and you fed me. I was naked and you gave me some clothes. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was in prison and I was sick and you came to see about me. Jesus, when were you hungry? You're the Lord of the universe. When were you naked? When were you thirsty? When were you sick and in prison? Inasmuch as you've done it unto the least of these, you've done it also unto me. I believe in the gospel in my heart. And as I lift that up, I don't mean it in any narrow sectarian way. I'm talking about the values that are resident and resonant in all of the great faith traditions. all of the great faith traditions have some variation of love your neighbor as you love yourself. And if we took that to Washington, D.C., I believe we could break gridlock and actually get something done for the people of Georgia and for the people of our country. But even with all of the attacks, all of the unfair accusations, all of the lies, even with them, as we say in the church, trying to scandalize my name. I don't know if that's a word, but we said it in church. Even with them trying to scandalize my name and call me everything but a child of God. Can I tell you something real corny, but it's true? I still wake up every 2 or 3 days and pinch myself because I can't believe I get to represent you in the United States Senate, that I get to do great things for the people that I love and for a state I love and a state that's given me so much. This is the honor of my life. It is an extension of my lifelong commitment to service. I'm not new to this, I'm true to this. I've been doing this work a long time. Long before I came to the Senate, I didn't just start talking about health care. Be wary of folk who say they're running for the Senate and they're talking about things they've never talked about before. And you can tell. I've been fighting for health care for years because I believe that it is a human right. In fact, a few years ago, I got arrested in a governor's office. I went by myself. Francis was there with me. He's standing right there. He shouldn't stand too close because we usually end up in jail together. Be wary of standing too close to folk who stand in the prophetic tradition. You might find yourself in some good trouble. And so we got arrested. Protesting in a governor's office. And I was holding a sign with a quote from Dr. King that said, of all the injustices, inequality in health care is the most shocking and the most inhumane. And they hauled me off to jail that day. But I thought it was a small price to pay when I considered the hundreds of thousands of working Georgians who are in the health care coverage gap, who are being used as pawns by craven politicians who refuse to expand Medicaid. Even though we've already paid for it in our federal taxes. It's not like we get a tax cut in Georgia because we don't expand Medicaid. We just subsidize health care in other states while our hospitals are closing. And people are literally dying. And so I went to jail that day. And then in 2017, I went to the United States Capitol. I didn't show up in the Capitol in 2021. I'm not new to this, I'm true to this. I was in the Capitol in 2021 protesting the $2 trillion bill that they were passing. If you listen to the political rhetoric, you would think that there weren't any $1 trillion bills passed until we got in office. They passed one in 2017, but it was about a tax cut mainly for the 1%. It was about taking resources from those who needed the most in order to give a tax cut to those who needed the least. I've run into billionaires. I've run into millionaires who said, well, I appreciate the tax cut, but I didn't really need it. And so I went to the United States Capitol that day, and I was with a group of clergy. I wasn't serving in office or running for any office. I was running for righteousness and truth and love and compassion and justice. And we stood in the rotunda of the Capitol and we were singing and praying. And the Capitol Police showed up and said, "Preachers, we understand, but you can't sing and pray in the rotunda of the Capitol." And I thought to myself, somebody needs to sing and pray. Somebody needs to bear witness to the God of love and justice. And they said, "Well, we'll give you 3 warnings, and if you don't move after the 3rd warning, we'll have to arrest you." And they were polite, they were professional. I'm not maligning the Capitol Police at all. They were first rate, and we all ought to be grateful to the Capitol Police after January 6th. But they said respectfully, "Pastor, after the 3rd warning, if you don't disperse this group, we're going to have to arrest you." What they didn't understand is that I had already been arrested. You can't arrest a man who's already been arrested. My mind and my imagination had already been arrested by truth and arrested by this idea that we are the United States of America, the greatest country on the planet, and certainly we can provide basic health care to the most marginalized members of the human family, to God's children. We can afford to do that. Matter of fact, we cannot afford not to do it. And I began to say to them that a budget is not just a fiscal document. A budget is a moral document. Show me a nation's budget and I will show you who matters to them, who's in and who's out, and where their priorities are. Forgive me again for quoting scripture, but you all sent a preacher to the Senate. Jesus put it this way: where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And if this budget, I said, were an EKG, it would suggest that America has a heart problem. And they listened to my speech. Then they took me to central booking. I don't mind at all. Because truth crushed the earth will rise again. I don't mind at all because the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. I don't mind at all because 4 years after that, you sent me back to the Capitol. And every Monday I pass through that rotunda on my way to my office, where I've translated my protests into public policy, my activism and my agitation into legislation. I wrote the Medicaid Saves Lives bill because of what you did in 2021. Give yourselves a round of applause for what you did to push us closer toward our ideals. And what I need to know is, are you ready to do it one more time? The issues are too urgent. The stakes are too high. The differences between me and my opponent are too wide for us to play with this. I know you're tired. I know you might be a little exhausted. I know you feel like we just did this, but we got to do it again. And there's nothing wrong with being tired. Just be Fannie Lou Hamer kind of tired. Fannie Lou Hamer, that Mississippi sharecropper, who stood up and said, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired." That's the kind of tired we need to be, because the other day when I began to talk about the fact that we need to expand Medicaid in Georgia, my opponent said that if you are able-bodied, first of all, that's a big if, doesn't apply to everybody. He said if you're able-bodied and you have a job, You have health insurance. And he's running for the Senate. That's how we do it in the black church. Turn to your neighbor and say, he's running for the Senate. Turn to somebody else and say, can you believe he's running for the Senate? That's how we do it in my church. I'm laughing, but I'm not joking. He said, if you have a job, you have health insurance. And he's running for the Senate. How is it that he does not know that when you talk about the 600,000 people in the Medicaid gap, you are largely talking about the working poor? The people who are extremely poor have Medicaid. The rest of us have private insurance. The people who are in the gap are the working poor. They are the folk who work for us every single day. Let me bring it closer to home for you. They are the folk whom we, in the midst of the pandemic, all of a sudden started calling essential workers. Well, if they are essential workers, they deserve an essential wage. They deserve essential benefits. They deserve essential health care. And they need a senator who understands that and who will not rest until they get it. The issues are too serious. The stakes are too high. And the other day when I started talking about insulin in a state where 11% of the adults have diabetes. You know somebody with diabetes. Everybody here knows somebody with diabetes. Everybody here. You may not know that you know somebody, but trust me, you know somebody with diabetes. $1 out of $4 in our healthcare system is spent on somebody with diabetes. So when you talk about managing diabetes, not only is it good for the person, it's good for our healthcare economy. It is a window into the landscape of our whole healthcare system. $1 out of $4 in our healthcare system is spent on somebody with diabetes. And insulin has been around 100 years. 100 years. And when it was invented, the patent was sold for $1. 100 years, $1. And big pharmaceutical companies are price gouging insulin. Now, they will tell you that they are investing that money in research and development. Give me a break. They're not making new and improved insulin. They're engaged in price gouging. And when I said that I passed, so that's why I'm focused on this issue. And it's not theoretical for me because I'm a pastor and I have visited my members. I've been there when families receive the news that the diabetes is out of control and your uncle has to get an amputation. That's right. Or grandma has to go on dialysis, or a young person has to go on dialysis because the kidneys are failing. And when I pointed that out, that we needed to cap the cost of insulin, not need to, I did it. I wrote the provision. That's right. In that office down the hall where I got arrested fighting for health care, I wrote the provision to cap the cost of insulin to no more than $35 of out-of-pocket costs for people on Medicare. And I would have gotten it for folk on private insurance as well, but some of my colleagues who work for the pharmaceutical companies blocked it. And when I pointed that out the other night, my opponent said people just need to eat right. And he's running for Senate. Now, my staff will tell you that I don't disagree. People should eat right. I've been saying that for years as a pastor, trying to encourage my members to have good health care practices. But not people can have diabetes and still eat right. People can eat right and still have diabetes. It's more complicated than that. Children have diabetes. And it doesn't matter how you got it. If you got it, why are they price gouging the insulin? His answer was people ought to just eat right. Well, maybe he should run for dietitian. I'm running for the United States Senate. There are 11 million people in this state, and only 2 get to represent you in the Senate. This is serious business. You can't just send anybody to the Senate. I don't mind, I'll give accolades where they're deserving. I grew up in the 1980s. That brother created a lot of excitement on the field. His performance was spectacular and entertaining on the football field. But we're on a different field right now. And the people of Georgia need a different kind of champion. Workers need somebody who will champion a livable wage. Young people who are growing up on the other side of the tracks or in public housing, as I did, need someone who will champion a college education and reasonable tuition and student debt relief. And seniors need somebody who will champion affordable prescription drugs so they don't have to decide between their medicine and their groceries. And women need somebody who will champion reproductive rights, who understand that women are wiser than politicians. Georgia needs a different kind of champion right now, and if you need somebody, here am I, send me. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to stand up for Georgia every day of the week. Georgia's on my mind. All the while bringing jobs and opportunity to our state. Because I believe in work. My dad poured into me and my mom poured into me a work ethic. My dad didn't let you sleep late in his house. He said, get up, get dressed, put your shoes on, get ready. One of my staff members asked me we were in Savannah earlier this morning, she said, you grew up in Savannah, did you go to the beach much? I laughed, I said, my dad didn't really understand recreation. Bless his memory. He poured into me a serious work ethic. And so did my mother. My mother grew up in Waycross, Georgia, Waycross, Georgia. Back-breaking work, picking somebody else's tobacco and picking somebody else's cotton. But because this is America, the octogenarian hands that used to pick somebody else's tobacco and somebody else's cotton picked her youngest son to be a United States Senator. This is the greatest country on the planet. With all of our flaws, with all of our challenges, it's the greatest country on the planet. I love America. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. That's why I love it enough to fight for it. I love it enough to criticize it. I love it enough to try to make the country better so that it embraces all of us. And so I'm working hard to create jobs. We were at a groundbreaking yesterday, shovel ceremony for a plant right in Bryan County, creating electric vehicles. That's the future. Economically and ecologically sustainable future for our children. 8,100 jobs in Bryan County. That gives me goosebumps. I know a little bit about Bryan County. I went to college at Morehouse in Atlanta, and I lived in Savannah. I know about Bryan County. I got my share of parking tickets. Speeding tickets. You know, I was young. In Bryan County, now they're getting ready to make electric vehicles in Bryan County. And that's because of the work that we've been doing in the Jobs and Competition Bill, investing in domestic manufacturing. The same company had their plant in West Point, Georgia, shut down a couple of times because they didn't have enough chips. Not because they didn't have enough customers, they didn't have enough chips. And so I led the way to help pass that bill to invest in the domestic manufacturing of chips right here in Georgia, to strengthen our supply chain, to lower costs for folks, to hold companies accountable, and to create jobs in every corner of our state. That's the work that we must do together. And you never know how important it will be. If you hadn't elected me and John Ossoff, my brother from another mother, y'all know we are twins, right? He just got all the hair. If we had not won these races, let me say in closing, and nobody believes a preacher when he says in closing, at least I'm not going to raise the offering, but you can go to my website, warnockforgeorgia.com. Let me say in closing that if you had not sent me to the Senate and John Ossoff to the Senate, with all of her competence and brilliance, you would not have a Ketanji Brown Jackson sitting on the United States Supreme Court. She wouldn't be there. You saw how nasty they were during the hearing. And if you hadn't given us the slightest majority that you could possibly have, she wouldn't have even have been in the nomination room, let alone in the courtroom. That's right. That's right. But because of what you did, she sits there. That's right. And I remember the day we confirmed her. The Senate chamber was full on both sides of the aisle. The vice president was sitting in the chair. And my colleague, Senator Cory Booker, and I were talking to the vice president. We were waiting on the vote to open. And the vice president looked at me and Cory, Senator Booker, and she began to say, guys, you know, this is quite a moment. You ought to take a moment, she said, and just pen a letter to somebody who comes to your mind. She suggested that to us, the way the black women in my life make suggestions. And smart men know when they've been voluntold. She made a suggestion, and then she reached into her portfolio and gave 2 United States senators each a sheet of paper. But not just any sheet of paper, she gave us the letterhead of the Vice President of the United States. And it didn't take me long to know who I should write that letter to, because the only job I love more than being your junior United States Senator, the only job I love even more than being the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church is Chloe and Caleb's dad. That's my favorite job by far. And it is the lens through which I do my work in the Senate. And I sat down. I thought about my daughter and my son. She's now 6. She was 5 at the time. He's 3. And I wrote a letter to my daughter. And I said, "Dear Chloe, today we confirm to the United States Supreme Court Ketanji Brown Jackson. In the long history of our nation, she is the first Supreme Court justice who looks like you, with hair like yours." While we were confirming her, a friend of mine, the vice president, suggested I write a letter. She's the first vice president who looks like you. I write to say that in America, you can become and you can achieve anything you set your head and your heart to do. Love, Dad. That was my note to my 5-year-old daughter. But I was thinking about all of our daughters, because we are inextricably bound. I wasn't just thinking about our daughters, but I was thinking about our sons, because we're tied in a single garment of destiny. And a ceiling, if you're thinking about it right, my beloved, a ceiling on any one of us, for whatever reason, is a ceiling on all of us. And so each of us has a stake in building a government that understands the concerns of all of the people. And so I was thinking about all of our daughters and all of our sons, and I was so excited that I couldn't wait to fly back home from Washington. I got on FaceTime because I wanted to read that letter to my daughter. And I got on FaceTime and I read the letter to her, and she listened with her 5-year-old self, and she listened, and she was not impressed. She said, "Can I go out and play now?" That's all right, she'll get it later. As we say in church, she'll understand it better. I think I got church folk here, by and by. But I thought about it in the days and the weeks since I wrote my daughter that letter, and it occurred to me that in the end, that's what legislation is. That's what public policy is. It is a letter to our children. And if we ask ourselves what we want that letter to our children and to the future to say, we might actually get the public policy right. Public policy, legislation, is a letter to our children. But not only that, citizenship is a letter to our children. What we decide to do about the existential crisis of climate change, what we decide to do on health care, whether or not we invest enough in America so that we have a future workforce and a workforce that is ready for the jobs of the future, what we do or what we fail to do in the end is a letter to our children. A vote is a letter to our children. And what you ought to ask yourselves is, what do you want your letter to say? I want my letter to say that I stood up. I stood tall in this defining moment in America. I want my letter to say that I stood up for workers, that I stood up for women. I want my letter to say that I stood up for a country where a child's outcome is not based on their parents' income. I want my letter to say that I stood up for a sustainable planet and a true and just world that embraces all of God's children. I want my letter to say that I did the best I could in this defining moment. Are you ready to write a letter to the future? Are you ready to stand up in this moment? Are you ready to tell your friends and your family to vote like they've never voted before? Are you ready to win this thing one more time and build a future that embraces all of our children? Well, stand with me. and pray with me and fight with me and vote with me until we win the future. God bless you, Statesboro, Georgia. Keep the faith. Keep looking up.